Picture this, summer of 1462. You are an Ottoman soldier, marching with the greatest military force the world has ever known. You have seen empires crumble. You have watched the walls of Constantinople fall. Now you are being sent into a small, almost insignificant principality called Wallachia to put down a rebel prince. Your commanders expect it to be over within days. Then the smell reaches you. Something between rot, decay, and something else entirely. Something you have never encountered before. Your entire column grinds to a halt. The scouts ahead have gone completely still. And as you round the hill leading to the capital city, you see it, a forest. Except the trees are not trees. They are people, 20,000 of them. Your comrades, your brothers in arms, suspended in the air on wooden stakes, arranged in perfect geometric rows that stretch as far as your eyes can see. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies bloated and blackened under the summer sun. Others are still moving, still breathing, still screaming. Your sultan, the man who brought down the Byzantine Empire itself, takes one look at what stretches before him and turns his entire army around and walks away. What kind of human mind builds something like this? And here is the part that should truly unsettle you. This was not the work of a madman. There was no rage behind it, no loss of control, no darkness of the soul left unchecked. This was a plan, precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Everything you think you know about Vlad the Impaler is incomplete. Not because the stories are false, but because the real truth is far more disturbing than any legend. This is the complete story of how one man turned human suffering into a weapon so powerful it redirected the course of empires. And by the time we reach the end, you will understand that the greatest horror was never what he did to bodies. It was what he did to minds. Before we go further, if you find yourself gripped by history that goes deeper than the textbooks ever dared, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. This is exactly the kind of story we bring you every single week. Let us begin with the question historians rarely stop to ask. What does it take to shatter a person so thoroughly that they become capable of building something like that forest of stakes? Go back to 1442. Vlad is 11 years old. His father, Vlad II, known as Vlad Dracula, meaning Vlad the Dragon, has just negotiated his political survival with the most powerful empire on earth. The terms were straightforward. Vlad II keeps his throne in Wallachia. In return, he hands over his two youngest sons as living guarantees of his loyalty to Sultan Murad II. So young Vlad and his brother Radu are taken from everything they know and delivered into the heart of the Ottoman world. On the surface, it did not look like captivity. They were housed in the palace at Edirne and later Egrigors. They received fine clothing, formal education, military instruction. They were taught Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, and Islamic scripture. To an outside observer, it might have looked like opportunity, but understand what was actually happening. This was not education. It was a years-long exercise in psychological dismantling. Vlad spent his most formative years, from ages 11 to 17, inside the machine of an empire that had mastered the science of ruling through fear. He watched, up close, how the Ottomans used public brutality not merely to punish wrongdoers, but to permanently alter the behavior of entire populations. He observed how a single, carefully staged act of violence could do what thousands of soldiers could not. He was being taught, whether anyone intended it or not, that terror deployed with precision was the most efficient governing tool ever invented, and while all of this was unfolding around him, he was completely powerless. His younger brother Radu adjusted, eventually forming a genuine friendship with the Sultan's son, Mehmed. Vlad did not adjust. Ottoman court records indicate he was routinely punished for insubordination. ination. Some accounts suggest physical abuse, possibly worse, possibly worse. The precise details have been lost, but what is beyond dispute is that something fundamental was forged inside him during those years. He absorbed every punishment, catalogued every technique, and filed it all away. Not in bitterness alone, but with something colder and more dangerous: purpose. In 1448, after 6 years in Ottoman custody, Vlad returned to Wallachia at 17 years old. 2 months later, his father was assassinated by rival boyar nobles who played both the Ottoman and Hungarian powers against each other for their own gain. His older brother, Mireia, was buried alive. Vlad was completely alone, surrounded by enemies on every side, with no army and no throne. But he did not simply want revenge. What he wanted was to rebuild the world according to the logic of his trauma. He would take every lesson the Ottomans had taught him and push it further than they had ever imagined, pushing it themselves. He waited 6 more years in exile, studying military tactics and political strategy with the patience of someone who has already decided that time itself is just another weapon. In 1456, backed by Hungarian forces, he finally took the Wallachian throne. The transformation was complete. If this kind of deep historical psychology is what you are here for, make sure you are subscribed. We are just getting started. The coronation feast of 1456 was where Vlad revealed exactly what kind of ruler he intended to be. He invited the boyar families, the very same nobility who had engineered his father's murder and condemned his brother to die underground. Hundreds of them arrived, dressed in their finest, expecting the usual rituals of loyalty and political theater. Wine flowed. The hall was decorated. Everything appeared normal. Then Vlad rose from his seat and asked one quiet question. "How many princes of Wallachia have you personally lived through?" The older nobles answered proudly. 7, 10. Some boasted of surviving a dozen different rulers. They believed they were demonstrating their political wisdom, their durability, their value to any prince who hoped to survive. They were, without knowing it, signing their own sentences. Vlad smiled. Then he gave the order. Every boyar who had answered was arrested immediately. He divided them into 2 groups based on age and physical condition. The older ones, those most directly responsible for what had been done to his family, were impaled on stakes outside the palace walls that very night. The stakes were inserted with deliberate care to avoid killing them quickly. Their deaths took hours. Some took longer. Their screams carried through the night air as Vlad moved to the next phase. The younger, stronger boyars and their families were stripped of noble clothes and marched 50 miles to the ruins of Poenari Castle. There they were, given a choice that was not really a choice at all. Rebuild the fortress by hand, or be killed where they stood. For months, they hauled stone up the mountainside, their former lives completely erased, their hands bleeding, their bodies breaking. Most did not survive the construction. The ones who did were never the people they had been before. Vlad had not just taken revenge, he had surgically removed an entire class of power and replaced it with absolute submission. And in doing so, he had revealed the core of his psychology. He did not want people who obeyed him out of loyalty or respect. He wanted people who obeyed because they had been reduced to a state where obedience was the only thing left. Then he turned outward. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, the same man who had been Vlad's childhood companion in Ottoman captivity, sent envoys to Wallachia demanding the annual tribute Vlad's father had agreed to pay. They also carried a personal summons requiring Vlad to appear in Constantinople to renew his oath of submission. The envoys arrived expecting negotiation. What they received was something no diplomatic mission had ever encountered before: When they entered Vlad's court and declined to remove their turbans, citing religious custom, Vlad listened politely to their explanation. He nodded, dead as if he found it genuinely admirable. Then he told them he respected any man so devoted to his faith that he would never remove the symbol of it. And then he said he wanted to help them honor that devotion permanently. He had the turbans nailed directly into their skulls. He did not kill them. That was the point. He sent them back to Constantinople, alive, mutilated, and half-mad with pain. They were not victims. They were letters. And when Mehmed received them, he understood the message perfectly. The boy he had known was gone. What sat on the Wallachian throne now was something that had taken every Ottoman lesson in psychological warfare and evolved it into something even the Ottomans had not conceived of. War became inevitable. Now here is what most people fundamentally misunderstand about impalement as Vlad practiced it. It was not an execution method. It was engineering. The image most people carry in their minds, a stake driven straight down through the body, would kill a person in minutes. That was useless to Vlad entirely. His method was far more technically precise. The victim was positioned face down. The stake, carefully shaped, rounded at the tip, and oiled, was inserted at a calculated angle specifically designed to travel through the body while avoiding every major organ and every significant blood vessel. The victim was then raised upright and gravity became the instrument of suffering. Over the course of many hours, and sometimes several days, the victim's own body weight would gradually force the stake upward through their torso. The trajectory was engineered to bypass the heart, lungs, and arteries. In documented cases, the stake would eventually emerge from the shoulder or chest while the person remained alive. Some survived this way for up to 3 days. Why this method specifically? Because Vlad understood, with the clarity of someone who had studied trauma from the inside, that witnessing extended suffering is psychologically devastating in a way that witnessing quick death is not. A battlefield execution is terrible but brief. The mind processes it and moves on. Impalement was a performance with a runtime measured in days. The screaming carried across valleys. The sight of someone alive on a stake, visibly conscious, visibly suffering, did something to the human brain that no conventional military display could replicate. And the physical act was only the beginning. The staging was everything. Stakes were placed along major roads, at city gates, in public squares, everywhere that visibility was maximized. Vlad understood that every person who witnessed an impalement became a storyteller, and every story multiplied the psychological radius of the original act 100-fold. The symbolism was layered with precision. The height of each stake corresponded to the rank of the victim. Peasants were impaled closer to the ground. Nobles were raised higher. The positions of greatest height were reserved for enemy commanders. He was building a visual language, a grotesque social hierarchy that communicated a single message in every direction. Everyone has a place in my world, and everyone will suffer according to their station. In some accounts, the arrangements of impaled bodies form geometric patterns visible from elevated ground. Circles, stars, concentric rings. This was not chaos. It was the opposite of chaos. It was a demonstration of control so absolute that Vlad could afford to treat human bodies as architectural elements. The message underneath the message was this: I have so much power that I can make suffering into geometry. A German pamphlet from 1462, based on accounts from Saxon merchants operating in Wallachia, described Vlad eating meals at a table set among the impaled, calmly dining, while dying men surrounded him on all sides. The precise accuracy of that specific account is debatable. What is not debatable is the psychological broadcast it represented. I am so completely beyond your moral framework that your horror means nothing to me. These pamphlets were among the first mass-produced horror documents in European history. Their woodcut illustrations spread across the continent and built Vlad's reputation into something that operated almost independently of the actual man. But the real question is whether any of it was working strategically. Was terror a functional military doctrine, or was this simply a powerful man's psychology expressing itself through the unlimited capacity for violence that power provides? That power provides. The summer of 1462 delivered the answer. By early that year, Vlad had not only refused to pay tribute, but had launched a series of raids deep into Ottoman territory, south of the Danube. In a letter he sent to the Hungarian king, he personally documented the kills, categorized by age and gender, totaling over 23,000 people. He kept a body count. He sent it as a report. Mehmed, the conqueror of Constantinople, the man who had never lost a significant military engagement, assembled a force estimated between 60 and 90,000 soldiers. Conservative estimates put this at more than triple the total military-age male population of all of Wallachia. This was not an invasion force, it was an erasure force. Vlad had at most 20 to 30,000 men, many of them peasants conscripted days before. A direct confrontation was not a battle, it was a formality with a predetermined outcome, so Vlad gave them nothing to fight. As the Ottoman army crossed into Wallachia, they found empty villages, burned fields, and poisoned wells, every food sour. And water supply for miles in every direction had been systematically destroyed on Vlad's orders. His own civilians had retreated into the mountains and forests, taking every animal with them. The Ottoman supply lines stretched thinner and thinner as the army pushed deeper into a country that had apparently ceased to exist. Then the nights began. Specialized units Vlad had trained in close quarters infiltration. Groups of 50 to 100 men struck Ottoman camps after dark. They killed sentries silently, set fires to supply wagons, stampeded horses, destroyed ammunition stores, and vanished before any organized response could form. The goal was never to win engagements. It was to make 60,000 heavily armed men afraid to close their eyes at night. The masterpiece came on June 17th. 1462, from captured Ottoman soldiers. Vlad learned that Mehmed himself was camped near Targoviste with his personal Janissary guard. He personally led a force of roughly 10,000 men in what history now calls the night attack. They infiltrated the enormous Ottoman camp wearing captured Ottoman uniforms and speaking enough Turkish to cause lethal confusion. They set fire to tents, stampeded horses, and drove directly toward the section of the camp where Mehmed's pavilion stood. They came within yards of killing the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The Janissaries formed a defensive perimeter and held. After hours of close quarters fighting in the dark and the fire and the chaos, Vlad recognized the perimeter would not break. He ordered his men to withdraw, and they disappeared into the darkness as completely as they had materialized from it. Ottoman casualties were relatively limited in number, perhaps 2,000. But what those numbers do not capture is what happened to 60,000 soldiers psychologically when they realized that a vastly outnumbered enemy had slipped through their entire camp in the middle of the night and nearly killed the man who commanded the most powerful army on earth. Morale deteriorated. Desertion increased. The army pressed forward into a dead country, hungry and sleepless, and unable to locate an enemy that refused to appear in front of them. And then they arrived at the capital, and they saw what Vlad had built for them. There are no words that do full justice to what Mehmed's army encountered on the road to Targoviste in late June 1462. The smell arrived first. The concentrated rot of thousands of decomposing human bodies in summer heat thick enough that soldiers could taste it on their tongues from a distance. Then they saw the stakes. They stretched for nearly 2 miles in length and over half a mile in width. Modern historians place the number between 15 and 20,000 impaled bodies. Ottoman sources claimed 10. 1,000, almost certainly minimized for their own political purposes. Wallachian and Hungarian sources reached as high as 20,000. Whatever the exact figure, what mattered was that it had no visible end, and it was not random. The bodies were arranged in precise geometric patterns, concentric circles radiating outward from the capital. Ordered rows, star shapes visible from elevated ground. Vlad had spent weeks, possibly months, preparing this. He had kept prisoners alive from earlier raids and border skirmishes specifically for this installation. Some had been impaled weeks before and were fully decomposed. Others were more recent, and some, according to multiple independent eyewitness sources recorded by Byzantine chroniclers, were still alive, still conscious, too weakened to scream, but not yet gone. The moaning of the dying reportedly carried across the entire field. At the center, elevated on the tallest stake of all, was the body of Hamza Pasha, the high-ranking Ottoman commander, captured in an earlier engagement. His remains were positioned directly facing the route of the Sultan's approach. A personal message with perfect visual framing. "This is what I do to your best commanders. Now ask yourself what I intend to do to you." Mehmed, who had watched the walls of Constantinople fall to his own artillery, who had ordered his own massacres, stopped his horse and was still. And for several minutes, the Byzantine chronicler Leonikos Chalkokondyles, who interviewed survivors and eyewitnesses, recorded his eventual response. He acknowledged that it was not possible to take the country from a man who had demonstrated this capacity. He said that a man who used power this way was worth much. This was not admiration. It was recognition. The Sultan was acknowledging that he was looking at something outside the boundaries of the military logic he had always operated within. The strategic situation had already been deteriorating for weeks. Supply lines were failing. The scorched earth had worked. The night raids had worked. The army was exhausted and rattled. His own commanders were already quietly recommending withdrawal. The forest of the impaled was the moment the decision became impossible to reverse. It was proof that the mind commanding Wallachia's defense was not playing the same game as everyone else. It was not trying to win battles. It was trying to destroy the will to continue fighting at all. Mehmed ordered the retreat within days. He left a contingent under Radu, Vlad's younger brother, who had grown up comfortable within the Ottoman system, to continue operations against Vlad. But the Sultan and the main army withdrew. The most powerful military force in the world had entered a tiny principality with overwhelming numbers and walked back out again. Now, not because they lost a battle, because a man with 20,000 soldiers had found a way to reach inside 60,000 armed men and switch off something fundamental. Vlad had won. But the story does not end with triumph, because what comes next reveals the final terrible logic of everything he built. Defeating the Ottomans should have made Vlad the celebrated defender of Christian Europe. In some quarters, it briefly did. The Hungarian king praised him. The Pope acknowledged his stand. But the tools Vlad had constructed over a lifetime of trauma could not be set aside once the immediate enemy was gone. He had only one tool, and he used it on everything. By late 1462, he was impaling Wallachian merchants for price manipulation. He was impaling boyars on suspicion of disloyalty rooted in nothing more than rumors. He was impaling entire villages for minor infractions. The instrument he had sharpened to stop an empire had become the only instrument he knew how to reach for, regardless of the situation in front of him. His political position collapsed rapidly. Radu, positioned by Ottoman gold as the stable alternative, began drawing support. The Hungarian alliance evaporated as Vlad's behavior became impossible to justify or manage. By November 1462, just months after the greatest strategic victory of his life, Vlad fled across the Hungarian border and was imprisoned by King Matthias Corvinus, the very ally who was supposed to be his most reliable supporter. The charges were murky. Some historians believe Matthias fabricated documents. Others conclude that Vlad had simply become a liability that no political relationship could absorb. He spent 12 years under house arrest in Hungary, comfortable quarters, a noble wife, children, by all accounts, a cooperative prisoner. In 1476, the chaos in Wallachia, under a series of ineffective successes, created an opening. With support from Hungarian and Moldavian forces, Vlad reclaimed his throne for the third time. He had approximately 2 months. In December 1476 or January 1477, the exact date has been lost. Vlad was killed in battle near Bucharest against Ottoman forces. The circumstances remain unclear. Some sources say his own men killed him, either through betrayal or confusion in the darkness of combat. Others say he was overwhelmed by Ottoman soldiers. What is certain is that his head was removed, preserved in honey, and sent to Sultan Mehmed in Constantinople as proof that the threat had been permanently neutralized. After everything, after the night attacks and the burned fields and the 2-mile forest of stakes that turned back an empire, Vlad ended his story as a preserved head displayed for the amusement of the ruler he had spent his entire life fighting. His body was reportedly buried at Snagov Monastery on a Romanian island. When the tomb was excavated in the 1930s, it was empty. To this day, no one knows where Vlad actually rests. In Romania, he is remembered differently than he is remembered everywhere else. There are statues. His face appears on merchandise. He is taught in schools as a national hero, brutal but effective, a man who stood with almost nothing against everything and somehow held. To the broader world, especially after Bram Stoker borrowed his name and his shadow for an 1897 novel about a vampire, Vlad became synonymous with supernatural horror, which is, in a quietly convenient way, exactly what lets the rest of us avoid sitting too long with what he actually represents, because the genuinely unsettling question that this story leaves behind is not what he was capable of. It is what it took to make him. An 11-year-old child handed over as political collateral to an empire that taught him every lesson he would later use against it. A person who was broken in a very specific way at a very specific time, who then spent the rest of his life building the world into the shape of what had been done to him. The horror was never the stakes. It was always what came before them. If this story stayed with you, the best thing you can do right now is like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week we go this deep into the histories that most people never. Hi here in full. We will see you in the next one.